Welcome to the Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast, brought to you by Balaguer Guitars. Founded in 2014, Balaguer Guitars strives to bring modern aesthetics and options to vintage-inspired designs. Go to balaguerguitars.com for more info. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Fishman, Inspired Performance Technology. Fishman is dedicated to helping musicians of all styles achieve the truest sound possible, wherever and whenever they plug in. Go to fishman.com for more info.
Hey, it's Jesco from AcousticSinsider.com. I'm back. First of all, thanks to EYAL and Joey and Joel for having me on the podcast once again. And I'm here on for a Dear Jesco episode to answer some of your questions. So let's get right to it. So the first one's from Jake Ottinger. Ottinger? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but sorry, Jake, if I'm butchering your name here. I'm just going to say it in German. Ottinger. Jake Ottinger. So Jake says, what's the best way for me to use a sub? I live upstairs from the crappiest neighbors on the planet that complain about every little thing to the landlords. I was thinking about one of those bass shaker things to put on my chair. I have a sub, but can only use it when they're gone. But I really need a solution for late at night. Any thoughts? Yeah. Well, I guess there are just some situations where there's just not much you can do. I definitely had that situation before, when there's just neighbors who are just not willing to play along. I think. Yeah, the best. I doubt that there's anything you can do with speakers, to be honest, because if they're that sensitive, they'll complain about everything. So I don't think I'd try. I don't think I'd. I think it's probably best to just avoid it completely. Yeah, you might be one of those bass packs that you put on your chair might work. I haven't tried them. People seem to like them. I have no idea. I don't have any experience with them, but they might work. My tip would be headphones. Quite simple. To be honest, I think that's a good tip for anyone out there. If you're just starting out, or if you really have no way to improve your listening situation, if it's just impossible, either financially or otherwise, you should just invest in a good pair of headphones. They will last you a long time, and money invested in headphones is very well spent. I'm thinking around the $300, sort of €300 mark. That's a very good pair of headphones. I used to use the Biodynamic DT990s, an open-backed pair. And you should definitely want to get an open back pair if you're just mixing or just kind of producing, working. Like if you're recording, a closed back pair is what you want. I don't really know why they have the semi-open headphones. I don't really see a point for them, but whatever. So yeah, get an open back pair, a good one, around €300, $300, and kind of that realm. That's very well invested money. At the moment, I use the Shure. What are they called? I'm actually wearing them right now. Shure SRH 1440. It's the sort of lower priced option of two models, and they are excellent. I was really, really impressed when I tried them out in the shop. And I've tried I went through quite a few different pairs of headphones. So you definitely want to try a few. Go out there and try a few, because the price, unfortunately, doesn't guarantee a good pair of headphones. One thing to listen out for when you're checking headphones is the stereo image. I'm a big nut for getting a good stereo image, for getting a good sound stage, so you can pan properly. You can actually tell where something is located in the stereo panorama, how wide things are, like if it's like super spread out in the stereo field, if like how far that's happening, what's actually happening there. And I remember I tried a pair by what was it? Audio-Technica? I don't think it was Audio-Technica. It was something else, some other brand. But they were around €300, and they were horrible. Like I couldn't tell on a track that I mixed. I couldn't tell whether the bass was mono or stereo, and that's just not a good sign. That means like the drivers in both drivers aren't matched properly, and there's some phase indiscrepancy there that actually makes the sound sort of fake stereo in quotation marks. That's not a good sign. So like you want to be able to tell if something is mono. You want to be able to place it properly in the sound stage. And then there's obviously frequency balance. To be honest, frequency balance I don't think is as important. Like you do want to have something that feels good to you, but a good time response is more important than a sort of flat frequency response. So there are headphones out there which really kind of mush the low end, and to be honest, I would count the biodynamics among those. And that's what I was so impressed with when I first listened to the Shure headphones, that their timing in the low end is super crisp, super tight. And you don't get a lot of energy. It's like it almost feels like there's no bass, but it actually goes down really low. It's just that it's fairly low and level. So, but this is again something that you want to compensate with, or you can compensate with matched loudness referencing. So get to know your headphones, get a good pair of headphones, get to know your headphones, and you should have no problem. And then judging bass will actually be much easier and much more straightforward than trying to do it in very suboptimal listening conditions, or like in your case, Jake, with no bass, basically. So yeah, Jake, that would be my answer to you. So the next question is by Michael Depré. It's a French name. Sorry again for the last name. He says it's pronounced Depré. So Michael Depré. Michael, you ask, in the previous podcast, you talked about finding the sweet spot for your speakers in your room. How do you go about doing this? At the moment, I'm just moving my table around in my room, and I think I have a cool spot. In brackets, speakers about 55 centimeters from the wall. But what should I listen out for? Okay, so I briefly went through this in the last episode, and you can definitely read up on finding a good sweet spot in an article I wrote on the URM blog called "Fixing Your Low End Without Knowing Anything About Acoustics." But I'm actually a bit confused about your question, because you say finding the sweet spot for your speakers. So if you're talking about positioning your speakers, I do that relative to the sweet spot. So I find my listening sweet spot first. And once I've determined that, then I position my speakers relative to that sweet spot. So in that case, you want to start off with the sort of standard rules for setting up an equilateral triangle with your speakers. And then you can kind of go from there. Actually, you should probably sign up to my email list because I'm going to go through this in more detail soon. I think I'm gonna write a proper guide about this, how to position your sweet spot and how to then position your speakers so you get the best of both worlds. So you kind of get to pick your sweet spot, your listening sweet spot for the best bass response, the best compromise in the low end that you can get from your room, and then how to position your speakers appropriately so that the spot where your speakers give you the best sound stage is the same as the spot for the best bass, so that way you actually have a listening spot that gives you good bass and a good stereo image. And you want to look out for that. I don't think I should go through it again right now. It's you can definitely read up about it on the URM blog, so check that out. So the next question is by Ryan Bridges. Hey Ryan, he says, I have a small room, 16 by 10 by 8 feet 7 inches, is that how you say it? I have bass traps in the corners from floor to ceiling. I have 4 early reflection panels, 2 feet times 4 feet times 3.5 inches deep in my listen position. My question, I get really bad 190 to 230 hertz build up. What should I do? It feels like it builds right behind my computer monitor. Your podcast was awesome. Thanks for your time. Later. Thanks, Ryan, for the question. First of all, that's a pretty good start. So you have 4 panels to deal with the early reflection points. I guess that's what you're saying. the build-up in the sort of low mids, it's very difficult to say right now where that comes from. There are definitely speakers that have a low mid build-up. It's possible that your room, depending on what materials are in your room, that your room actually kind of sucks out energy above those low mids, so you're kind of left with more energy in the low mids because the high mids are sort of reduced more. So this is like if you have like a sort of a broad bump in your frequency response, now's the time to pull out an EQ. So this is kind of the right scenario to use EQ on your listening setup. And you might, depending on what speakers you use, there might be an EQ on the back of your speakers that you can use for this. You could try either reducing the sort of around the 200 hertz mark, or you could try boosting above that. Although I always recommend to cut if you can on speakers, and because of headroom for your amplifier. But so this, you could try positioning your speakers slightly differently. So you could try and see if you change your stereo triangle slightly, either by moving your speakers closer to you or moving them further, like sort of further apart from each other, so making the stereo triangle larger. You could definitely try one of those methods to see if that changes the frequency balance in the low mids. But again, this is like a sort of a typical scenario where I would say get to know unless it's really really bad, but get to know what your speakers sound like using equal loudness referencing, and then just mix accordingly. Unless you have options to maybe get an EQ or use an EQ, or or move your speakers a bit to see if that changes something. So hope that helps. So the next question is from Andre6 from my hometown of Brussels. Hey Andre, how's it going, man? He says, for a workflow junkie that you are, you must have plenty of other cool workflow tricks and improvements that speed up or facilitate your mixes. Can you share a few? And he asks, do you have a pre-mix routine to help you get in the right mind space and be able to tune out distractions? And he says to EYAL, he says, thanks for bringing Jesco on. He's incredible. Thanks, Andre, man. So first of all, so it's, workflow tricks. Let me think about this. So there are a couple of things that let's start with my pre-mix routine, maybe because that kind of walks me through the process sequentially. I definitely prepare my mix very, very meticulously. I have a template that I use, as many people do, with colors, with a proper naming scheme. I do all the technical work before I actually start the mix. So I do the technical work on the tracks that I use, sort of like the exported stems. I do all the technical processing on those before. So that means loading up the track, setting initial levels, so that because of this whole equal loudness referencing and sort of calibrated loudness listening thing, I make sure that my levels, the track is at the average level that I like to listen at. I make sure that I go through each track individually, and I clean it up if any cleaning up needs to happen. I do any low cuts. I do any edits that I need to do if there's like pops, clicks, noise, any kind of stuff like that to remove. So yeah, all the sort of not so creative stuff, all the technical stuff and like sort of prep work, I do that on one day, and then I only start mixing the next day. So I actually, so it's kind of, I'm kind of my own assistant, I guess. So I come in the next day, and then I have the project ready to go, and I can dive right in. And so the first thing that I do, so I'll have 2 or 3 references loaded up in my project, again, matched loudness to my project. So the first thing that I'll do the next day when I come in is that I'll sit down and I'll listen to 2-3 tracks, reference tracks that I picked the day before, and I'll listen to them at the matched loudness to prime my brain, to sort of train my brain into what my loudspeakers, what my system sounds like on that particular day to me, and that kind of gets me started. So I'll just sit here and I'll just kind of mess around on my phone or whatever. I don't really pay conscious attention, although sometimes I do if I like the track, but sometimes I just sit here and fiddle for like 10-15 minutes and listen to 2-3 reference tracks. And then I'll jump right in, and the first thing that I'll do when I mix is I'll set levels, and I'll set the levels really quickly. I'll do the initial levels using clip gain, just changing the volume of the actual wave file, the waveform, because I don't actually use the faders. Funnily enough, they just sit there and they don't do anything. So I mix without faders. And so that's the first thing I do. I'll because I'm fresh, and the most important thing to mixing is balance. Like, I mean, mixing engineers used to be called balance engineers back in the days when they didn't have all the tools available that we have now. They just had some faders, and all they could do is change the actual volume after the tracks were recorded. So they used to be called balance engineers, and it's still very much like that now. The main thing, our jobs as a mixer is to set the balance, and the better you get at controlling volume, at manipulating volume, at using volume creatively, the better your mixes be, because it is by far the most expressive tool in our toolkit. So that's what I go for first, and I'll do that quickly and I'll do that swiftly, and after that, I'll usually take a break, or I'll dig in if I need to do any EQ. But as it so happens, if the balance is right, you'll notice that you'll really notice which tracks need to be EQ'd, or like where I want to change the tonality or the color or the sort of timbre or the dynamics of a certain stem. And so that's what I'll do then. And I always make sure to have a first mix ready to export after my first session. So by the end of my first session, I want to have a track ready to export, and I'll export that right away. I'll remove the excess headroom using a limiter. So I'll just very gently sort of push the track into a limiter. but just to the point where it's not changing the sound, but I get a decent amount of sort of volume from the file, and then I'll export it and I'll put it on my MP3 player, and then I won't listen to it until the next day. And then same thing, because we're so brainwashed, I guess. Our brains are so primed so quickly. I don't listen to the track at all until I'm ready to take notes, and then I'll sit down, I'll have my notepad ready or my phone, I'll take notes in Evernote, and I'll listen to those 2-3 reference tracks, and just sit there and listen to those and prime my brain on my in-ears, my tiny little cheap-ass Sony headphones, and at home. And I'll prime my brain with those 3 reference tracks, and then I'll listen to my mix, and I'll start taking notes right away. I don't stop the music. I make sure I'm not distracted, and I listen to the song once and I take notes. Anything that comes to mind. It doesn't matter if it's big or small. Anything I notice, even if I don't think it's particularly important, it doesn't matter. I write down everything, and then I'll do a second pass and I'll double check and see if I notice anything else, or if any of those things that I noticed kind of relativize themselves. Maybe I notice that I actually like the feeling that it generates, that weird thing that I noticed before. And so, and then once I've done that, I have a list of changes, and I go back to the studio and I open the session, and I usually I don't even listen to the track again. I think I'll just literally start making the changes, and I'll just do what I wrote down. So I don't even judge whether that made any. So I mean, I do judge if that made sense, that what I wrote down, but like, I won't listen to it again and see and kind of try and figure out if all of those are valid, all the points that I wrote down. But I'll start and I'll make changes. And once again, I'll start with the sort of the big changes. So if there are any big important volume changes that I decided to make, I'll start with those first. Because volume is the most important thing. So I always start with the sort of big volume changes, and then I work my way through my list sort of to smaller and smaller bits. And usually by that time, I'm pretty happy. I'll once again, I'm done with the session, so I'll export the track. And if I have time, I'll listen to it again the next day. Otherwise, usually by that point, I'm happy with the mix, and I'll send it off to the client. And I'll just await their feedback. And I might listen to it again before or until they send me feedback, and I'll make some more notes, or I'll just wait to see what they say, first of all. So yeah, that's kind of my process. I think it's really important not to get hung up listening to your mix or your project. It's because our brains are primed so easily, and our auditory memory is so short, and we kind of get involved in the emotions so quickly. If you want to work, and don't get tempted to listen to the track just for fun, or to just listen to it unless you are listening to it for a specific purpose. I think that's really, really important, because you lose objectivity so incredibly quickly. You don't want to waste a judging capital on useless listening. Yeah, I guess that's. I hope that helps, Andre. Okay, onto the next question. This is from Michael, and he says, "Hey EYAL, hey Jesco. I've already talked with Jesco about this topic, but I think it could be interesting for the Q&A. Is it useful or necessary to have an air gap behind the acoustics foam, and why?" He also has another question, but let me get to that later. So when you're considering a mineral or an insulation material absorber, you always have to think. You kind of have to think as of the absorber and the air gap as one absorber system. So like the air gap plus the material is the actual absorber, and you basically increase low frequency absorption by making your absorber deeper. So the air gap kind of is like saying, instead of like, you could put as, like I always say, I always talk about the 6 inches, right? 6-inch deep material of that particular weight class. So you could say putting a 6-inch absorber on the wall, directly on the wall, is the same as putting a 4-inch absorber on the wall with a 2-inch air gap. And the reason is that the material close to the wall is actually hardly effective. That has to do with particle velocity. So if you read my article on AcousticsInsider.com about the best kind of insulation material, I talk about how absorption material, how insulation material absorbs sound, and it works by friction with the motion of the air particles. That's called sound velocity, that variable that acousticians talk about. So sound velocity actually decreases the closer you get to the wall. And basically you can imagine right up against the wall, there's no space for the actual air particle to move because it's right next to the wall. And that means that any insulation material right up against the wall is pretty much non-effective. So that's why the material closest to the wall it kind of loses efficiency. It loses effectiveness. So you don't need that material right up against the wall. Instead, you could just use an air gap. Or you could just leave that space empty, right? So now you can kind of see how this starts to make sense. Or put in a different way, if you just have 4 inches of material, you can fake a 6-inch absorber by just putting it 2 inches away from the wall, right? And that's the same thing that happens with bass traps. If you put a 6-inch mineral wool or insulation material absorber diagonally across the corner, you have that air gap behind the panel, and instead of filling it with material, you just leave it empty because the material in there is hardly effective. So that's kind of the way to think about the air gap. I build 6-inch panels for both for bass traps and for panels on the early reflection points, and otherwise simply because it's easy and because like insulation material hardly costs anything. So I always build the same type of panel. That way I'm flexible if I want to use it for absorption at early reflection points or as bass traps, right? But the panel actually increases its effectiveness by putting it diagonally across the corner, because it automatically, inherently creates this air gap behind the panel. So I hope that answers your question. And the second part that you asked, the second question was, what would be a possible career path if someone wants to pursue a career as an acoustic mastermind and thanks. I'm just going to take that as a compliment. Thank you. And consultant for recording and mixing studios. What would be a possible career path if someone wants to pursue a career? Okay. I should probably ask Brian Hood. He's the expert on this with his home studio, 6-figure home studio blog, which is an excellent blog. You should definitely check that out. How can I answer that? If you want to, it's definitely two different things. Like acoustics is definitely more science than recording or mixing. I think all the sort of the recording engineer, sound engineer specialities are definitely creative jobs, and the acoustics, the sort of acoustician job is part creative and a lot of science as well. So first of all, if you're uncomfortable with the science, it's possibly not for you. Apart from that, all I can really tell you is how I got into all of this. I'm not sure if that's going to help, but so how did I start? I started playing music, playing piano when I was 6 or 7 years old. Played piano for 9 years, played drums, and then got into production fairly on, like sort of just like composing songs on a keyboard when I was like 12 or 13, and I moved on to like computerized music fairly quickly after that, and I just kind of did it as a hobby. And I then studied aerospace engineering at university, so I got my master's degree in aerospace engineering. But it always kind of I always did music first of all as a hobby on the side, just producing electronic dance music, house, drum and bass, hip hop, this sort of stuff. And then after I finished my degree, I really wanted to see if there was like a bridge between, if I could somehow bridge my engineering knowledge and my passion for music. And so I went to university again here in Berlin and did another master's. Well, I actually didn't finish it, but that's another story. So I actually went to university again for doing a course called Audio Communication and Technology, and that was actually perfect in bridging that science and sort of creative gap. And we did a whole lot of stuff from acoustics to recording technology, microphones, loudspeakers, but then also history of music, music theory, empirical research into music, psychoacoustics. All of that was part of that course. And I went through all of that. I didn't actually do the actual master's thesis because by the time I got up to it, I was actually working full time, and I decided it wasn't worth it. But I was lucky because friends of mine were already quite established electronic music producers here in Berlin, and I actually I made an attempt at offering a consultancy service to build studio infrastructure. So like hardware infrastructure, like helping people figure out their workflows and figuring out the technology and making it all work and putting it together. And I quickly discovered there wasn't a market for that. But I was always really good at, or I really enjoyed mixing, and people commented on my mixes. And so that's around the time when Pensado's Place started, and I remember watching that and going, oh wow, there's a job, you can be a mixing engineer, and these guys earn money, and I was just like, okay, that's awesome. So why don't I give that a shot? And so I kind of decided to put all my effort into that, and so I spent a year basically studying mixing. So I read a lot of books. I read Mixer Man, aka Eric Zarafin's book Zen and the Art of Mixing, and I can't remember what his name is, Roi Iyaki or something like that. He had this mixing book, like the sort of a really big fat book on mixing. I read through all of that, I studied that, and I downloaded a lot of free session files from all sorts of genres, and I just practiced mixing. So I would mix the same song over and over and over again. And so these buddies of mine who were music producers here, they actually offered to help me out and give me work to mix, basically gave me their tracks to mix when I didn't have a name out there. And so because I helped them out with their computer infrastructure. So these were somewhere I built their whole setup, both of their studios, and kind of gave them like IT support for life, basically. So these guys, they helped me out by giving me projects to mix. And so I basically mixed for them exclusively for about a year and practiced mixing on the side when they didn't give me anything. And so I did that for about a year, and obviously talking to people. And these guys, they got my name. They kind of recommended me. They mentioned me in like blogs and when they were interviewed and stuff like that. And so kind of like very slowly my name kind of trickled out there. And then like the first sort of other people started getting interested. They also cooperated with a lot of other people on projects, like sort of producing tracks with other people. And so like they started hearing my name. And the mastering engineers that we worked with would hear my name. And so like, I can't remember exactly when, but eventually sort of the first few people, 2-3 people started asking me if I could mix their projects. And I definitely, I mean, at that point it was still sort of very budget work that I would offer my work for sort of very budget price, because I didn't have the qualifications, I guess, or the name to ask for more money. And to be honest, I wasn't good enough to ask for more money either. But so for the sort of very, very, very reasonable price, I would mix tracks for other people. I started mixing for some other people, and that's kind of sort of there. Then that kind of got the ball rolling. And the sort of the mastering engineers that I work with, I got on really well with them, and so they actually started recommending me to clients of theirs. I guess when people approached them, and then they sort of realized that what they really needed was a good mix first of all, and if they kind of knew my price point, and so they would kind of recommend me as a mixer at their price point. And I think that's kind of the important thing to understand here, is that when you're starting out, you really got to work with the people who are at your level. And if you do a good job, and if you get along with people, and you always should make an effort, then you'll grow together with your clients. So you'll grow your expertise, you'll grow your knowledge, your name along with your clients. And so like I think you really want to aim for, if you're starting out, you want to aim for people who are at your level, and just learn obviously the work, the sort of the musical work, but also learn the business side of it, the sort of relating to clients, how to work on projects, how to stay on budget and on time, or rather how to stay on time so you can stay on budget. So I think that's my answer to your question. I hope that answers it. So yeah, Michael, there you go. On to the next one. This is by my good buddy Kort. This is one of the two guys who I was just talking about. And he says, "Dear Jesco, since I moved into a new flat with my project studio, I was thinking about turning a small room next to it, 2 meters times 1.4 meters times 2.5 meters in height, into a recording booth, especially for vocal recordings. Does that make any sense? If so, how should I treat the room? Or should I rather record in my 25 square meter control room? Thanks for all your advice. It has been helping me so much for years now. Best, Quad. Awesome. Dude, Quad, love you so much, man." So yeah, I think this is a good point, like vocal booths, recording booths. So in terms of acoustics, there's one thing to realize: a small room will sound like a small room. And getting a small room to sound good is not easy. So unless you need the isolation, the like proper isolation of a separate room, I always advise to stay away from recording booths or just small rooms for recording, because there are so many things that speak for recording like right next to you in your control room or in your project studio. Not just, well, first of all, just the connection that you have with the performer. You can talk to them directly. You can see how they act, how they react. You can hear what they are singing or saying or playing. And it's so much more intimate. It's so much more direct. I think there's definitely something there said there to say about just the quality of the interaction. And so but if you really need the isolation for one reason or another, full disclosure here, I haven't had to treat a tiny vocal booth recording booth yet, thankfully. So I'm kind of saying this more from theory than anything else. But if you wanted to treat a small room like that, I mean, you still have to get all the reflections under control, and you have to get all the, especially if you're recording instruments or in that occupy low frequencies, you have to get the low frequencies under control. And positioning in such a small space is very limited, like what you can do. I mean, you should try and get the most from positioning, but it's not easy. So you need to get that under control as well. So you basically need a lot of broadband trapping. You need to get the reflections under control that happen around, well, just basically everywhere. I'm not really sure how to answer this in a better way, but I mean, obviously start with, if you're recording a vocal, for example, or if you record only vocals, start with treating the walls at the height of the head height and at microphone height, because on that plane that most of the reflections or that most of the energy is going to go right back into the microphone. So you that's where you want to start. But then obviously the scening is going to be really close as well. So you want to definitely treat that. You definitely want to treat this the wall behind the singer, because if you're using a cardioid mic, it's going to be really sensitive for anything that reflects back off of the wall behind the performer. And yeah, in terms of like that's just controlling reflections. Or if you want to control the low end, if you want to control bass, I think there's one really good article on, or they used to be, they just say changed their website. I think it might be gone now, but they used to have an article on there where they treated a vocal booth and they used a limp mass absorber. So it's basically a heavy foil, like a heavy tarp that they hang off of the wall. It's kind of free hanging. That will pick up the energies in the low end and kind of dampen them out. And I haven't used these kind of hanging foils, these loose membranes as a bass trap, so I can't say just how good they work, but they're fairly shallow, which is an advantage in such a small space. So it might make sense to, like they did in the Sound on Sound article, to actually treat one entire wall with a big heavy loose membrane, like a heavy foil or something. And these really need to be heavy. Like I'm not sure if a carpet will do, but yeah. So that's my advice. Unless you need the isolation, I'd probably recommend to just stay away from recording booths. It's just asking for trouble. So moving on to the next question. This one's from Theodore, Heyman. He says, can you make some recommendations for mixing headphones, brands, styles, etc.? I'm currently using Audio-Technica ATH M50s and they translate okay, but they're not good at revealing low end in a mix. I know you guys speak highly on treating your space and then condone headphone mixing. However, my options are limited right now, and having to share space with my family and dog is hard to mix on my monitors. I really like the podcast with Jesco Lohan on treating your space. I'm just not able to at this time. Thank you guys for all you do. Thanks, Theodore, for the question. So yeah, I mentioned this. Actually mentioned this in the answering the first question. So yeah, I'm if you're mixing open-backed headphones, if you're recording closed-backed headphones, and spend some money on headphones. It's good. It's very well invested money. If you are, I would actually buy a good pair of headphones before I buy a decent pair of monitors, because with the monitors comes treating the room, and it's just if you're right at the beginning, you will have so much more effect. You will have so much more advantage, a lot larger advantage from just getting really good headphones than from buying medium price speakers and working in a small room. If you're just starting out, that's my recommendation. And like I said, the Shure SRH 1440s are the ones that I use. I love them. The more expensive model, the 1480s, I believe, are definitely even better, but they're pricey. So that's what I recommend. Hope that helps. The next question is by Daniel McNeil. Hey, Daniel. He says, my question is about bass traps. When using 6-inch panels across a corner to help control bass, is it beneficial to build the trap from floor to ceiling, or is it okay if the panel is in the middle of the wall? My understanding is that bass builds up in tri-corners more than it does in a corner with two walls. So would making two traps to go across the top and bottom of the wall or the entire length be the best? Thanks for all the info you've shared. It's been extremely helpful. You're welcome, Daniel. Thanks for the question. Okay, so there's a common misconception about bass trapping that I should really talk about. So basically, the thing is, when you're bass trapping, and I'm going to use bass trapping as synonymously with reducing room modes. When you're trying to tame room modes, the thing with room modes is that this thing that I talked about in the other question, the particle velocity, the sound velocity, so the movement of the air particles is actually not in sync with sound pressure. So sound velocity in a standing wave is 90 degrees out of phase with sound pressure. So what that means is the places where there's the most sound pressure are the places with the least sound velocity. And so actually placing a mineral wool panel that absorbs sound velocity, placing a mineral wool or an insulation material panel in a high pressure area is actually the least effective place to place a bass trap, a mineral wool panel. So actually, if you're looking for the best, if you only have a few places if you only have a few bass traps and you want to place them for the most effective reduction of room modes, you need to find the place, the position along a corner where that particular frequency, that particular room mode, has no sound pressure, because that's going to be the place with the highest particle velocity, theoretically. So this is kind of where you want to start. But then there's also something to be said about the general approach of bass trapping, and I always kind of compare it to like kind of a shotgun approach, like using broadband panels, using insulation material panels as bass traps is very much sort of a shotgun approach. You kind of aim generally in the right direction and use a lot of pellets and just kind of hope something hits, sort of thing, right? So that's why I always advise, that's why I advise to cover, if you can, cover the entire corner from one side to the other, from floor to ceiling, with bass traps, because the different room modes will actually have their points of highest particle velocity, highest sound velocity, at different places along the corner. And by placing panels across the entire length of the corner, you'll make sure that you'll actually have a panel in the optimum place for every room mode. So this is one of the issues if you only have a couple of bass traps and you actually put them only in the vertical corners. There are room modes whose frequency don't have any point of highest particle velocity in that particular corner. So it might be really effective at reducing one or like certain frequencies, certain room modes, but it might be not effective at all at reducing others. So you kind of want to spread out your bass traps along all the different corners that you have available. And you want to start with the points of lowest pressure or highest particle velocity. Okay, and so obviously you need to figure out what your room modes are first of all, what the culprits are. Then you gotta play those sine waves, and then you can check along your corners to figure out where those points are. So in terms of answering the questions, the tri-corners are actually theoretically the least effective places to have insulation material absorption panels for bass. And that's why you'll actually see that in many of the studios that I build, I don't worry about shaping some particular tri-corner absorber to fit in that space. If it's left empty, I just don't care. Obviously, this is theory, and in practice, there's a whole mumbo jumbo of room modes and energies flying around. So, like, you will get some absorption if you put a panel in the sort of tri-corner. It's just that theoretically, it's not the best place to start, and if you want to follow theory, you want to start with the places of highest particle velocity or lowest pressure in terms of room modes. Okay, so yeah, I hope that helps. And finally, we have a question from Runar Magnussen. Hey Runar, a regular awesome dude. So he says, so my question regards how well your bass hunter technique translates to tracking. For instance, if recording a bass guitar cabinet, instead of carrying the cabinet around the room while the musician is playing to find a balanced spot, could it instead be placed in a corner while going around in the room to find the sweet spot? And after finding that spot, could the mix simply be placed there and the cabinet in front of it? The same question goes for, of course, for drum kits, guitar cabs, and other instruments with a healthy amount of low end and low mids. So first of all, I guess so. I do mixing mainly, so I don't have much experience recording. I've recorded vocals, but and a guitar once in a while, but I haven't recorded bass or drum kit yet. So I can't really I can't really say from experience. But in theory, it should definitely help you find the spot in your room. It should help you get in the ballpark. I mean, obviously, you want to tailor the sound from your recording, from your amp to the sound that you're looking for in your mix, right? So I guess there's you definitely should keep that in mind. Obviously, that the sort of tonality and the color you're looking for is more important than. Or is important rather than, and not just getting a balanced sound. But I guess as a starting point, it should work because the sort of the idea behind the room modes and how they work and figuring out where they balance against each other in the sort of best way, where the compromise between them is the best. That technique still applies. So. I guess it works. Try it out and let me know. That'd be awesome. All right. Thanks for listening. And EYAL again, Joel, thanks for having me on. All the best to you guys. If you have any more questions, if you're interested in all this stuff, come find me at acousticsinsider.com. And speak soon. Bye-bye.
The Unstoppable Recording Machine Podcast is brought to you by Balaguer Guitars. Founded in 2014, Balaguer Guitars strives to bring modern aesthetics and options to vintage-inspired designs. Go to BalaguerGuitars.com for more info. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Fishman, Inspired Performance Technology. Fishman is dedicated to helping musicians of all styles achieve the truest sound possible wherever and whenever they plug in. Go to Fishman.com for more info. To ask us questions, make suggestions, and interact, visit nailthemix.com/podcast and subscribe today.